The horse collapsed just past the town limits, its legs buckling beneath the weight of exhaustion and the rider who had pushed it too far through the blizzard that had turned the Kansas plains into a white nightmare. Selena was barely visible through the driving snow, just ghostly shapes of buildings and the faint glow of lamplight struggling against the December storm of 1882. The woman on the horse's back tried to stumble forward on foot, her legs numb from hours in the saddle, her fingers frozen inside her gloves as she gripped the reins and attempted to coax the animal to stand one more time. Coleman James had been crossing from the general store to his barn when he saw the dark shape materialize from the white curtain of snow. At first, he thought it was a trick of the storm, but then he heard the desperate voice, a woman's voice, pleading with her horse. He dropped the sack of grain he was carrying and ran toward them, his boots crunching through the fresh powder that had already accumulated 6 inches deep in the last hour alone. "Miss, let me help you," he called out, but his words were nearly stolen by the wind. He reached her side and saw her face, pale as the snow itself, lips tinged blue, eyes struggling to focus. She was beyond exhausted, beyond cold, somewhere in that dangerous territory where the body starts to shut down. The horse beside her was in no better condition, its flanks heaving, foam at its mouth despite the freezing temperature, head hanging so low its muzzle nearly touched the ground. "My horse," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Please, my horse." "I will take care of you both," Coleman said, and without waiting for permission, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps the adrenaline flooding his system made her feel that way. He looked back at the horse, knowing he could not leave it standing in the storm. "Can you walk just a bit further?" he asked, then realized how foolish the question was when directed at an animal. But the horse seemed to understand something had changed, that help had arrived, and when Coleman started walking toward his barn with the woman in his arms, the horse followed with slow, painful steps. The barn was warm compared to the outside, though not by much. Coleman had 3 horses of his own inside, and their body heat had raised the temperature enough that ice would not form. He laid the woman down on a pile of hay in the corner, then went back to secure the door against the wind. Her horse stood just inside, still trembling, still gasping. Coleman knew he had to work fast. He grabbed an old blanket and began rubbing down the exhausted animal, working the circulation back into its legs, wiping away the sweat that would turn deadly in the cold. He spoke softly to the horse, the way his father had taught him, the way all good horsemen knew to do. "You did well, boy," he murmured, noticing it was a gelding, probably 8 or 9 years old, a decent animal that had simply been asked to do too much. "You brought her here safe." That is all anyone could ask. The horse's breathing began to slow, becoming less frantic. Coleman led it to a stall, gave it a small amount of water, not too much yet, not while it was still so hot despite the cold, and threw a heavy blanket over its back. Then he turned his attention to the woman. She had not moved from where he had laid her. Her eyes were closed, but he could see her chest rising and falling. Her clothes were expensive, he noticed, not the typical dress of a woman traveling alone in winter. Her coat was fine wool, now soaked through, and her boots were good leather. She wore no wedding ring, he saw when he pulled off her gloves, though there were rings on other fingers, delicate gold bands with small stones. Coleman went to work with the same methodical care he had shown the horse. He knew about cold, about what it did to a body. He wrapped her in dry blankets from his house, then carried her across the yard through the storm to his small cabin. The distance was only 50 feet, but the wind was so strong he had to lean into it, and the snow was coming down so thick he could barely see his own front door. Inside, He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and stoked the fire in the stone hearth until it roared. He heated water and filled his wife's old hot water bottles, the ones that had sat unused for 3 years since Mary had died, and placed them around the woman's body. Then he made coffee, strong and black, and sat in the chair beside the bed, waiting. She did not wake for 2 hours. Coleman used the time to return to the barn twice, checking on her horse, making sure his own animals had enough feed and water. The storm showed no signs of letting up. This was going to be one of those blizzards that people remembered, that they measured other storms against. He was glad he had stocked up on supplies the week before. When her eyes finally opened, they were the color of storm clouds, gray with hints of blue, and they held a wariness that spoke of recent fear. "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, strained from the cold. "My home, just outside Salina. You rode into town on a horse that could not go another step. I brought you both to shelter." Coleman stayed in his chair, not wanting to frighten her. He knew how this looked, a strange woman in a strange man's bed, but there had been no choice. "My name is Coleman James. You are safe here." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillow. "My horse, in my barn, recovering. He will be fine, I think, though you pushed him hard. Another mile and you might have killed him." Tears filled her eyes, spilled over. "I had no choice. I had to get away." Coleman waited, but she did not elaborate. He handed her the coffee he had kept warm by the fire. "Drink this. Then if you want to tell me why you were riding through a blizzard alone, I will listen. If you do not want to tell me, that is fine too." She took the cup with both hands, her fingers still shaking slightly, and sipped. The warmth seemed to give her strength. "I am Laurel Owen. I was engaged to be married in Kansas City. 3 days ago I discovered my intended was already married, to 2 other women in fact. When I confronted him, he became violent. He threatened me, said no one would believe me, that I would marry him and be grateful for it. So I left. I took my horse and what money I had hidden and I rode. I have been riding for 3 days, sleeping in barns, staying off the main roads. When the storm hit this morning, I knew I had to find shelter, but I was lost. I saw the lights of your town and I just kept going." Coleman absorbed this information, his jaw tightening at the thought of a man threatening a woman. "You did right to run. A man like that, he does not deserve the title. You are welcome to stay here until the storm passes and you decide where you want to go next." "I have money," she said quickly. "I can pay you for the room and board, for caring for my horse. We will talk about that later. Right now you need to rest and get warm. Are you hungry?" As if in answer, her stomach growled audibly, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." Coleman stood and moved to his small kitchen area. It was not much, just a table and a wood stove, some shelves with basic supplies, but he was a decent cook. Living alone for 3 years, he had learned by necessity. He made stew from the beef he had been saving, added potatoes and carrots and onions, seasoned it with salt and pepper, and a touch of dried thyme. The smell filled the cabin, warm and comforting, cutting through the sound of the wind howling outside. Laurel watched him work from the bed, and Coleman was conscious of her gaze. He was 30 years old, unmarried now though he had been once, a man who kept to himself mostly, working his small spread of land, raising horses to sell, keeping a few cattle. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, his face too weathered, his nose broken years ago in a fight he had not started but had finished, but he was strong and capable, and he knew his own worth. "How long have you lived here?" Laurel asked, her voice stronger now. "All my life. I was born in that bed you are lying in, actually. My parents built this cabin in 1850 when Salina was barely a settlement. They are both gone now. My father died 5 years back. Heart gave out. My mother followed him 6 months later. I think she just did not want to be without him. That is a kind of love most people only dream about, Laurel said softly. It is. I had it once with my wife, Mary. She died bringing our son into the world. He died too, never took a breath. That was 3 years ago this past October. Laurel's hand went to her mouth. I am so sorry. Coleman stirred the stew, not looking at her. Life is hard out here. It takes more than it gives sometimes. But you keep going because that is what you do. They were quiet after that, the only sounds the crackling fire and the storm outside and the occasional scrape of the spoon against the pot. When the stew was ready, Coleman helped Laurel sit up, propping pillows behind her, and brought her a bowl with a thick slice of bread he had bought from the general store. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, and he was glad to see color returning to her face. This is very good, she said. Thank you. You are welcome. Coleman ate standing by the fire, leaning against the mantel, his own bowl in hand. He was trying not to notice how beautiful she was, now that the immediate crisis had passed. Her hair was dark, almost black, and hung in damp waves past her shoulders. Her face was refined, delicate features that spoke of good breeding, but her eyes held strength. She was younger than him, he guessed, maybe 25 or 26, old enough to know her own mind, old enough to have been hurt by the world. The storm continued all through the night and into the next day. Coleman slept on the floor in front of the fire, wrapped in blankets, insisting that Laurel keep the bed. He woke before dawn and went out to the barn to tend to the animals. The snow had drifted against the barn door, and he had to dig his way in. Inside, all the horses were restless but safe. Laurel's gelding looked much better, his eyes brighter, his stance more stable. She will want to see you, Coleman told the horse, stroking its neck. Give it another day and you both will be strong enough for whatever comes next. He did not want to think about what came next. Did not want to think about Laurel leaving, riding out of his life as suddenly as she had ridden into it. But he forced himself to be practical. She had a life somewhere, plans that did not include staying in a small cabin with a widowed horse rancher in Kansas. When he returned to the cabin, Laurel was awake, sitting up in bed, her hair braided over one shoulder. She had found Mary's old dressing gown, and Coleman felt a pang seeing her in it, but it was not painful exactly. Mary would have wanted someone to use it. I hope you do not mind, Laurel said, gesturing to the gown. My clothes were so damp I hung them by the fire to dry. Of course. Whatever you need. Your horse is doing well. Another day of rest and good feed, he will be ready to travel again if this storm ever breaks. Laurel looked toward the window where snow was still falling steadily. I have never seen snow like this. In Kansas City we get snow, but not like this. Prairie storms are different. Nothing to stop the wind, it just blows and blows. We might be snowed in for a few days. I have supplies enough for both of us, so do not worry about that. I feel like I am imposing terribly. Coleman shook his head. You are not. Truth is, it is nice to have company. I do not realize how quiet it gets until someone else is here. They fell into an easy rhythm over the next 2 days. The storm continued, unrelenting, and they were trapped inside together, two strangers learning each other's stories. Laurel told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a successful merchant who had died when she was 20, leaving her with a modest inheritance. She had moved west to live with an aunt in Kansas City, hoping for a fresh start, a new life. That was where she had met Charles, the man she had nearly married, the man who had turned out to be a liar and a cheat and possibly worse. I feel so foolish, she said on the second night, sitting at the small table while Coleman cooked dinner. I should have seen the signs. There were always excuses, reasons he could not introduce me to his family, trips he had to take for business. But he was charming and attentive, and I wanted to believe him. That does not make you foolish. That makes you human. He is the one at fault, not you. When I confronted him, he was like a different person. His whole face changed. He grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. She pulled up the sleeve of the gown, and Coleman saw the dark marks, the clear outline of fingers. His hands clenched into fists. If he ever comes near you again, I will make sure he regrets it. Laurel looked at him, something shifting in her expression. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to run when you needed to, smart enough to trust your instincts, strong enough to ride through a blizzard to save yourself. That is all I need to know. The air between them changed after that, became charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Coleman forced himself to look away, to focus on the food he was preparing, but he was intensely aware of her presence, the way she moved, the sound of her breathing. On the third day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright against the snow, and the world was transformed into a glittering white landscape. Drifts had piled up 8 feet high in some places, and the temperature had dropped even further, but at least the wind had stopped and the snow had ceased falling. Coleman dug paths from the cabin to the barn and to the small outhouse behind the cabin. Laurel helped, despite his protests, using a shovel he found for her. They worked side by side, breath clouding in the cold air, cheeks flushed with exertion. It felt good to move, to do something physical after days of being cooped up inside. Look at this, Laurel said, pausing to lean on her shovel. I have never seen anything so beautiful. Coleman stopped and looked where she was pointing. The sun had caught the ice crystals in the snow, making the whole prairie sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from chimneys in Salina, proof that others had survived the storm too. It is beautiful, he agreed, and deadly. That beauty out there, it can kill you if you are not careful. Like many beautiful things, Laurel said, and when Coleman looked at her, she was not looking at the snow anymore. She was looking at him. That night, after they had checked on all the horses, after they had eaten dinner and cleaned up, after the fire had burned down to glowing coals, Laurel spoke the words that Coleman had been both hoping for and dreading. I should probably leave soon. The roads will be passable in a few days, I think. I need to figure out where I am going, what I am going to do. Coleman was sitting in his chair, she on the edge of the bed, and the space between them felt vast. Where will you go? I do not know. I cannot go back to Kansas City. Charles would find me, maybe Denver. I have heard there are opportunities there for women. I could find work, maybe as a teacher or in a shop. You could stay here. The words were out before Coleman could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Laurel's eyes went wide. What? Coleman stood, paced to the fire, then turned back to face her. I know it is crazy. I know we barely know each other. But these past few days, having you here, talking with you, it has felt right in a way nothing has felt right since Mary died. You need a place to stay, somewhere safe. I have this cabin, this land. I'm not proposing marriage or anything improper, but you could stay, at least for a while, until you figure out what you want to do. I could build a partition, give you privacy. You could help with the horses if you wanted, or just rest and recover. Whatever you need. Laurel was silent for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she stood and crossed to him, stopping just a foot away. Coleman, you are one of the kindest men I have ever met. You saved my life, took care of me when you had no obligation to do so. But I cannot impose on you any more than I already have. It is not imposing if I am offering. What would people think? A single woman living with a single man. This is the frontier, Laurel. People are too busy surviving to worry much about gossip. and anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "You would defend my honor. I would defend you, period." She reached up and touched his face, her hand cool against his bearded cheek. "I need to think about it. Can you give me tonight to think?" Coleman nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The touch of her hand had sent electricity through his whole body, waking up parts of him he had thought dead. He wanted to pull her close, to kiss her, to tell her that he was falling for her and had been since the moment he had seen her stumble through the snow. But he did none of those things. Instead, he stepped back and nodded again. "Take all the time you need." That night, Coleman lay in his blankets by the fire and listened to Laurel breathe in the bed across the room. He did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about the risk he had taken, offering to let her stay. She could say no. She probably would say no. It was the sensible thing to do. And yet, he found himself hoping with an intensity that surprised him. In the morning, Laurel was already awake when Coleman opened his eyes. She was dressed in her own clothes, now dry, and sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. The sun was streaming through the window and her hair caught the light, shining. "I will stay," she said without preamble. "For a little while at least, until I can save up enough money to move on. I will help with the horses, with cooking and cleaning, whatever you need. And we will be proper about it. You will build that partition you mentioned, and if anyone asks, I am your cousin visiting from back east." Coleman sat up, his heart pounding. "You mean it?" "I mean it. But Coleman, I need you to understand something. I am not ready for anything more than this arrangement. My heart is still bruised from Charles and I need time to heal. I need to learn to trust again. Can you accept that?" "I can accept that." "Then we have an agreement." Coleman stood and extended his hand. Laurel took it, and they shook, formal and proper, sealing the deal. But the warmth of her hand in his lingered long after she let go. The next weeks were some of the happiest of Coleman's life, though he tried not to examine that fact too closely. He built a partition as promised, stringing heavy canvas across the room to give Laurel privacy. She protested that it was too much trouble, but he insisted. Propriety mattered, not just for her reputation but for his own peace of mind. He needed the physical barrier, something to remind him that she was off limits, at least for now. Laurel proved to be an excellent horsewoman, which should not have surprised him given how far she had ridden alone. She helped with the training, working with the younger horses, teaching them to accept the saddle and bridle with patience and firmness. Coleman found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, admiring the graceful way she moved, the confident way she handled even the most skittish animals. They rode into Salina together to pick up supplies, and Coleman introduced her as his cousin Laurel, visiting from back east. The postmaster, Henry Carter, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, was more direct. "Cousin, is she? Funny, Coleman. I do not recall you ever mentioning any cousins before." "We are not a close family," Coleman said easily. "Laurel is my mother's sister's daughter. She is recovering from an illness and needed fresh air." Mrs. Henderson looked at Laurel, who stood calmly beside Coleman, her face pleasant but revealing nothing. "Well, welcome to Salina, dear. If you need anything at all, you let me know. We women have to look out for each other." Laurel smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That is very kind." As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Laurel whispered, "She does not believe you for a second. Probably not. But she will not make trouble. Mrs. Henderson is all bark and no bite. And if someone does make trouble, then we will deal with it." No one made trouble, though Coleman knew people were talking. It was a small town, and gossip was one of the few entertainments available. But as January turned to February and the worst of winter settled in, people seemed to accept the story, or at least stopped questioning it openly. Laurel became a familiar sight around town, always polite, always proper, and gradually the whispers died down. At home in the cabin, a different kind of tension was building. Coleman was acutely aware of Laurel's presence at all times. The sound of her moving behind the partition at night drove him to distraction. The sight of her in the morning, hair loose and face soft with sleep, made his chest ache. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, moving around the small space like they had been doing it for years instead of weeks. But Coleman kept his distance, respected the boundaries she had set. He did not touch her except when necessary, did not let himself imagine what it might be like to kiss her, to hold her, to make her his in truth. He had promised to give her time, and he would keep that promise if it killed him. Laurel, for her part, seemed to be healing. The wariness in her eyes faded. She smiled more easily, laughed at his jokes, shared stories of her childhood and her parents. She spoke less often of Charles, and when she did, it was with anger now instead of hurt, which Coleman took as a good sign. Anger could be cleansing. It was the sadness that festered. One night in late February, a warm front moved through, bringing rain instead of snow and raising the temperature enough that Coleman did not need to keep the fire roaring all night. They had finished dinner and were sitting at the table, playing cards by lamplight. It was a game Mary had taught him, one he had not played in years, but Laurel knew it too, and they had fallen into the habit of playing most evenings. "Can I ask you something?" Laurel said, studying her cards. "Anything. Do you ever think about marrying again?" Coleman's hand froze in the act of drawing a card. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. You are still young, Coleman. You have so much life ahead of you. Do you plan to spend it alone?" "I was married. I had my chance at that kind of happiness. It ended. I have made my peace with it." "That is not an answer." Coleman put down his cards and looked at her directly. "What do you want me to say, Laurel? That I think about it sometimes. That I wonder what it would be like to have a partner again, someone to share this life with. Yes, I think about it. But wanting something and having it are two different things." Laurel set down her own cards. "What if it was not? What if you could have it? Laurel, I know what I said when I first came here. I know I told you I needed time, that I was not ready, and all of that was true. But Coleman, it has been 2 months. 2 months of living here with you, working beside you, watching the way you care for the animals, the way you treat people with kindness and respect. 2 months of falling asleep every night knowing you are just on the other side of that canvas and wishing you were not." Coleman's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have healed faster than I expected. I am saying that you are nothing like Charles, nothing like any man I have ever known. I am saying that when I think about my future now, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Coleman stood so fast his chair fell backward. He moved around the table, and Laurel stood to meet him. For a moment they just looked at each other, and Coleman saw in her eyes the same longing he felt, the same need. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because, Laurel, if we do this, if we cross this line, there is no going back for me. I am not the kind of man who can love halfway. It is all or nothing." "I am sure," she whispered. "I have never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, finally, cupping her face in his hands and pressing his lips to hers with all the pent-up longing of the past 2 months. She melted against him, her arms going around his neck, and it felt like coming home. The kiss deepened, grew urgent, and Coleman had to force himself to pull back before he lost control entirely. "We should do this right," he said, breathing hard. "I want to marry you, Laurel. Not because of propriety or what people might say, but because I love you. I think I have loved you since you looked at me with those storm cloud eyes and asked about your horse before yourself. Marry me." Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are like Charles, that love does not have to hurt. Tears spilled down Laurel's cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, Coleman, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Salina with Mrs. Henderson and her husband standing as witnesses. Laurel wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Coleman wore his best suit, the one he had not worn since Mary's funeral. The Reverend, a kind man named Thomas Price, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about second chances and the grace of new beginnings. When Coleman slipped the ring onto Laurel's finger, a simple gold band he had bought from the jeweler in town, his hand was shaking. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and told him he could kiss his bride, Coleman did so with a tenderness that made Laurel's breath hitch. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too." They had a small celebration at the cabin, just the Hendersons and a few neighbors who had become friends. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the small space, laughter and joy that filled the room until the early hours of the morning. When everyone finally left and Coleman closed the door behind the last guest, he turned to find Laurel watching him, her eyes dark with desire. "Come here," she said softly. Coleman went to her, and they came together with the urgency of people who had been waiting far too long. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, their bed now, and they spent their wedding night exploring each other with wonder and passion, learning what brought pleasure, what brought gasps and sighs and finally, release. Afterward, Laurel lay in Coleman's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never knew it could be like this," she said quietly. "So gentle and yet so powerful at the same time." Coleman kissed the top of her head. "This is what it should be. This is what it is when two people truly love each other. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for trusting me enough to learn." They fell asleep tangled together, and Coleman woke several times during the night just to make sure it was real, that Laurel was truly there beside him, his wife now in truth. Each time, he found her still there, warm and solid and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. Spring came to the Kansas prairie with an explosion of wildflowers and green grass. Coleman and Laurel fell into married life as easily as they had fallen into working together. She continued to help with the horses, and her skills proved invaluable when it came time to break the yearlings to saddle. Word spread about the quality of Coleman's horses, and he began to get buyers from as far away as Wichita and even Denver. One afternoon in May, Laurel rode into the yard on her gelding, the same horse that had brought her through the blizzard. His name was Ash, she had told Coleman, because of his gray coat, and he had recovered fully from his ordeal. She dismounted with a grace that still made Coleman's breath catch and walked over to where he was mending a fence. "I have news," she said, and there was something in her voice that made him set down his hammer. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful." "Coleman, I am with child." For a moment, Coleman could not speak. Joy and terror warred inside him, memories of Mary flooding back, the nightmare of losing her and their son. Laurel saw his face change and took his hand. "I know you are frightened. I know what happened with Mary. But I am healthy and strong, and we will get the best doctor, and everything will be fine." "You do not know that." "No, I do not. But I believe it. And I need you to believe it too, Coleman. I need you to be happy about this with me, not afraid." Coleman pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I am happy. I am terrified, but I am happy. I cannot lose you, Laurel. You have to promise me I will not lose you. I promise. I will be fine. We will be fine." The pregnancy progressed without complication. Laurel continued to work with the horses through the summer, though Coleman fretted constantly that she was doing too much. She laughed at his worrying but agreed to take on lighter duties as her belly swelled. By autumn, she had stopped riding altogether, and Coleman had taken over all the outside work, leaving her to manage the house and handle the business side of things, which she did with surprising acumen. In November, as the first snow began to fall, almost exactly a year after Laurel had ridden into his life, the pain started. Coleman rode into town faster than he had ever ridden before, fetching Dr. Samuel Morrison, an older man who had delivered half the babies in Salina. The doctor came without complaint, though it was the middle of the night, and set up in the cabin with calm efficiency. "You need to wait outside," Dr. Morrison told Coleman. "No, I am staying." The doctor looked at Laurel, who was gripping the bed frame, her face pale but determined. "What do you want, Mrs. James?" "I want him to stay. I need him here." "Then he stays. But Coleman, you will do what I say when I say it, understood? I have no time to deal with a fainting husband." "I will not faint." The labor was long and difficult. Coleman held Laurel's hand through every contraction, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, spoke words of encouragement that felt inadequate against her pain. As the hours stretched on and dawn broke outside, he began to pray, something he had not done since Mary died. "Please," he thought. "Please let her be all right. Please let them both be all right." "One more push," Dr. Morrison said. "Come on, Laurel, you can do this. One more." Laurel screamed, a primal sound that tore at Coleman's heart, and then suddenly there was another sound, a baby's cry, lusty and strong. Coleman's legs went weak. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Coleman looked at Laurel, saw tears streaming down her face, saw her reach for the baby. The doctor placed the child in her arms, and she cradled him close, laughing and crying at the same time. "We have a son," she said, looking up at Coleman. "We have a son." Coleman sank onto the bed beside her, wrapping his arms around them both, and let himself cry for the first time in 3 years. These were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. His small family, alive and well in his. They named him Caleb James Owen, combining both their names, a symbol of their united life. Caleb was a robust baby with a powerful set of lungs and his mother's gray-blue eyes. Coleman was besotted from the first moment, and Laurel teased him constantly about spoiling the boy. "He is only 3 months old, Coleman. You cannot give him everything he wants." "Why not? He is my son, our son, and he will be a tyrant if you do not learn to say no." But Coleman found it impossible to deny Caleb anything. The sound of his son's laughter became his favorite sound in the world. He made toys with his own hands, little wooden horses and wagons. He took Caleb out to the barn as soon as the boy could hold up his head, introducing him to the horses with the solemnity of a sacred ritual. "This is your legacy," he told Caleb, who gurgled and reached for the nearest horse's nose. "Someday, all of this will be yours." Laurel watched from the barn door, her heart so full she thought she might burst. This was everything she had never dared to hope for: a home, a husband who loved her beyond measure, a child. She thought sometimes of that desperate night when she had ridden through the blizzard, terrified and alone, and marveled at how her life had changed. If someone had told her then that within a year she would be married to a good man, living on a horse ranch in Kansas, the mother of a beautiful boy, she would have thought them mad. The years passed with the rhythm of prairie life. Winters were hard but manageable, springs were wet and green, summers were hot and busy, autumns were crisp and golden. The horse ranch prospered under Coleman and Laurel's combined efforts. They became known throughout the region for quality animals and fair dealing. Buyers came from farther and farther away, and Coleman had to hire help, a young man named Daniel who lived in town but came out every day to work. Caleb grew into a sturdy, happy child, more at home in the barn than the house, always trailing after his father, copying everything Coleman did. When he was 4, Laurel became pregnant again, and this time Coleman handled the news with more equanimity, trusting that lightning would not strike twice, that this time would be different. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening, so quickly that Dr. Morrison almost did not make it in time. She came into the world with a full head of dark hair and her father's brown eyes, and they named her Catherine Ann after Coleman's mother. 2, Coleman said, holding Catherine while Caleb peered at his baby sister with suspicious interest. "We have 2 children, Laurel. Our family is growing." "Is that a problem?" "That is a blessing." Life with 2 children was exponentially more complicated than with 1, but they managed. Caleb took his role as big brother seriously, always protective of Catherine, even when she was tiny. As she grew, they became inseparable, Caleb teaching her everything he knew about horses, Catherine following him everywhere on her chubby legs. When Catherine was 2 and Caleb 6, a letter arrived from Boston that changed everything. Laurel's aunt, the one she had lived with in Kansas City, had died, leaving Laurel a substantial inheritance. The amount was staggering, more money than they could make in 10 years of ranching. "What do you want to do?" Coleman asked, reading the letter over her shoulder. "I do not know. I never expected this. Aunt Margaret and I were not close, not really. I am surprised she even remembered me. This money, it could change things. We could expand the ranch, buy more land, hire more help. Or we could move somewhere else, somewhere easier, maybe back east if you wanted." Laurel turned to face him. "Do you want to leave?" "No, this is my home, but I want you to be happy." "I am happy." "Coleman, I am happier than I ever imagined being. I do not want to leave. I want to use this money to make our life here even better. Let us buy that land to the south that Johnson has been trying to sell. Let us build a bigger house, one with separate rooms for the children, a real kitchen for me, a study for you to do the books. Let us invest in our future here." Coleman kissed her, long and deep, not caring that the children were playing nearby. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Not since this morning." "Well, I love you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Laurel Owen James." They used the inheritance to transform the ranch. They bought the Johnson land, doubling their acreage. They built a new house, a proper 2-story home with real glass windows and a wide front porch. Coleman insisted that Laurel have her own room for sewing and reading, a space that was just hers. She insisted he have a proper office for managing the business, which had grown beyond anything his parents could have imagined. The barn was expanded too, with stalls for 20 horses instead of 10. They bought breeding stock, carefully selected mares, and a magnificent stallion that Coleman paid a fortune for but knew was worth it. The foals that stallion produced were exceptional, and within 2 years, people were coming from 3 states away to buy Coleman James horses. Caleb turned out to have a gift with horses that exceeded even his parents' abilities. By the time he was 10, he could gentle the wildest colt, could read an animal's mood and temperament with uncanny accuracy. Coleman watched his son with pride that bordered on awe, knowing that the ranch would be in excellent hands when his time came to step back. Catherine, meanwhile, showed a different kind of gift. She was brilliant with numbers, could calculate complex sums in her head faster than Coleman could with pencil and paper. By age 8, she was helping with the ranch accounts, catching errors that Coleman missed, suggesting ways to increase profits. She also had a way with people, a charm that made even the hardest bargainers soften. Coleman joked that she would make them all rich, and Laurel did not disagree. One evening, when Caleb was 12 and Catherine 10, the family was gathered on the front porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of orange and gold. Coleman had his arm around Laurel, and the children were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. "I am the luckiest man alive," Coleman said suddenly. Laurel looked up at him. "Why do you say that?" "Because I have everything. A woman I love beyond measure, 2 incredible children, a home, work that satisfies me, good health. What more could any man want? I could give you more," Laurel said quietly. Coleman looked at her, saw the familiar expression, and his eyes widened. Again. "Laurel, you are 42 years old. Is it safe? Dr. Morrison says I am as healthy as a woman 20 years younger. He sees no reason to worry." Coleman pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then I will not worry, I will just be grateful." The third pregnancy was more difficult than the first 2. Laurel was sick more often, tired more easily. Coleman insisted she rest, took over all her duties himself with the help of Caleb and Catherine. The children rose to the occasion beautifully. Caleb handling all the outside work he was capable of, Catherine managing the house and cooking with surprising skill for one so young. The baby came early, in the middle of March, during a late-season snowstorm that reminded Coleman viscerally of the night Laurel had ridden into his life. Dr. Morrison came through the storm just as Coleman had once brought Laurel through it, and this time the labor was short, almost too short, over in just a few hours. Another boy, smaller than Caleb had been but perfectly formed, with a crown of red gold hair that came from neither parent but from some distant ancestor. They named him Christopher James, and he completed their family in a way none of them had known was missing. The years continued their march. Christopher grew from infant to toddler to boy, as rambunctious and full of life as his siblings had been. He had a gift for making people laugh, a natural comedian who could lighten any mood. He also had a way with dogs, seemed to attract them wherever he went, and Coleman eventually gave in and let him have one, a cattle-dog mix that Christopher named Scout. Caleb began courting at 16, a sweet girl from town named Emma Henderson, granddaughter of the woman who had questioned Coleman's story about Laurel being his cousin all those years ago. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly, liked to claim she had known the truth all along and had just been waiting for them to admit it. Catherine showed no interest in courting, too focused on her studies and the ranch business. She had plans to attend university, something almost unheard of for a girl from rural Kansas, but with the ranch's success and Laurel's inheritance, it was possible. Coleman supported her ambitions completely, proud of her intelligence and drive. Christopher, at 10, announced that he wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up, so he could take care of horses and dogs and all the animals on the ranch. Coleman and Laurel encouraged this dream, knowing that the world was changing, that education and specialized knowledge would matter more and more. One autumn evening, when the children were grown or nearly so, Caleb 20, Catherine 18, and Christopher 12, Coleman and Laurel took a rare evening alone, riding out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise that overlooked the entire spread. The sun was setting, and the air was cool and crisp, smelling of dried grass and distant wood smoke. "You remember the night we met?" Laurel asked, sitting close to Coleman on the blanket they had spread on the ground. "Every detail. I thought you were going to die right there in the snow. You were so pale, so cold. I thought I was going to die too, and then you appeared like something out of a dream, my rescuer. You rescued yourself, Laurel. You rode through that storm, made the choice to run, to save yourself. I just provided shelter. You provided everything." A home, a family, a life I never could have imagined. Coleman turned to look at her. The years had touched them both, silver threading through Laurel's dark hair, lines around Coleman's eyes, but to him she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. More so, because now he knew every part of her, every expression, every mood, every dream. "I should thank you," he said. "You brought me back to life. After Mary died, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me feel again, made me want to live again, not just survive." Laurel kissed him, soft and sweet and filled with years of love. "We saved each other then. We did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Coleman thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain and loss they had each endured, the chance encounter in a blizzard that had changed everything. He thought about his children, growing into their own people, preparing to make their own marks on the world. He thought about the ranch, thriving under his and Laurel's stewardship, providing employment for a dozen families now, known throughout the region for quality and integrity. "I want you to know something," Coleman said finally. "If I had to do it all again, every hardship, every loss, everything that hurt, I would do it without hesitation if it meant ending up here with you." Laurel's eyes filled with tears. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. I am not done. I want you to know that you are the love of my life, Laurel. Not because you were the first or the only, but because what we have, what we built together, is something rare and precious. We are partners in every sense of the word. You are my equal, my match, the other half of my soul. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every single day. Coleman." Laurel was crying openly now, happy tears that spilled down her cheeks. "I love you so much. You are the best man I have ever known, the best husband, the best father. Our children are so lucky to have you. I am so lucky to have you." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and true. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of home, of horses and hay and the good earth. In the distance, they could see the lights of their house, warm and welcoming, hear the faint sound of their children's laughter. This was happiness, Coleman thought. Not the absence of pain or difficulty, but the presence of love, of purpose, of people who mattered. This was what life was supposed to be. They rode back to the house as the moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the land. The children met them at the barn, Caleb taking the horses to unsaddle and brush down, Catherine herding them all inside for the dinner she had prepared, Christopher chattering about something Scout had done that day. The family gathered around the table, passing food and stories, laughing and teasing, the easy comfort of people who knew they were loved. Coleman looked around at each face, committing the moment to memory. Caleb, so like him in build and temperament. Catherine, with Laurel's quick mind and his own stubbornness. Christopher, unique unto himself, the baby who had completed them. And Laurel at the other end of the table, catching his eye and smiling, that smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. After dinner, after the children had scattered to their own pursuits, Coleman and Laurel sat together in the parlor, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Tell me a story," Laurel said sleepily. "What kind of story?" "Our story. Tell me about the night we met." Coleman smiled. She asked him to tell this story often, and he never tired of it. "It was the worst blizzard I had ever seen," he began. The wind was howling like something alive, and the snow was so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I was crossing from the store to the barn when I saw a shape in the white, thought it was a ghost at first. But then I heard a voice, a woman's voice, begging her horse to stand up just one more time. I ran to her, and when I got close enough to see her face, I thought I was looking at an angel. Laurel closed her eyes and listened, a smile on her lips as Coleman wove the familiar tale. She knew every word, had heard it 100 times, but it never got old. It was their beginning, their foundation, the moment when two lost souls had found each other in the storm. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Caleb married Emma Henderson in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Salina. And a year later they presented Coleman and Laurel with their first grandchild, a girl they named Mary, after Coleman's first wife. Coleman was touched beyond words by the gesture, and he held baby Mary with tears in his eyes, thinking about the woman he had lost and the family that had come after. Catherine did attend university, studying business and accounting in Kansas City. She came home for holidays and summers, always full of stories about her classes and her plans. She graduated with honors and returned to Salina, joining the ranch business officially, modernizing their accounting practices and expanding their client base even further. Christopher pursued his dream of veterinary medicine, apprenticing with Dr. Morrison's replacement, a younger man who had set up practice in Salina. He showed real talent, and Coleman knew that when the time came for Christopher to take over the animal care at the ranch, they would be in excellent hands. Coleman turned 60, then 65. His hair went completely silver, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he was healthy and active, still working every day alongside his sons. Laurel turned 63, still beautiful, still sharp as a tack, still the love of his life. They had 9 grandchildren by then, with more on the way, and the ranch house was always full of noise and laughter and life. One spring morning, Coleman woke with a strange feeling in his chest, a heaviness he could not quite name. He said nothing to Laurel, not wanting to worry her, but he moved a bit more slowly that day, taking frequent rests. By evening, the feeling had passed and he forgot about it, but it came back, sporadically over the next months. Sometimes it was just the heaviness, sometimes a tightness, sometimes pain that radiated down his left arm. He finally mentioned it to Christopher, who insisted he see the doctor. Dr. Wilson, the new young physician in town, examined Coleman thoroughly and delivered the diagnosis with gentle seriousness. "Your heart is weak, Mr. James. I suspect you have had several small incidents already. You need to slow down, take it easier, let your sons handle more of the work." Coleman took the news stoically, but inside he was reeling. He had always thought of himself as strong, invincible, the kind of man who would work until the day he died and die satisfied. The idea of being limited, of being weak, was foreign and frightening. He told Laurel that night, holding her close in their bed. She cried, but only a little, then squared her shoulders in that way he loved. "Then we will adjust," she said firmly. "You will do what the doctor says. Our sons are more than capable of running the ranch. It is time to step back, Coleman. Time to let them take over while we enjoy our grandchildren and our life together. I am not ready to be old. You are not old. You are 68 and you have lived a full, hard life. Your body is telling you to rest. Listen to it." Coleman did listen. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations, though it nearly killed him to do so. Caleb took over as the primary manager, with Catherine handling all the business and financial matters, and Christopher overseeing the health and breeding programs. The ranch continued to thrive under their leadership, and Coleman had to admit, albeit reluctantly, that they did not really need him anymore. But he found new purpose in his grandchildren. He spent hours with them, telling stories, teaching them to ride, passing on everything he knew about horses and land and life. He and Laurel traveled a bit, taking the train to Denver and once all the way to San Francisco, marveling at how the world had changed since their youth. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a huge party at the ranch, attended by what seemed like half of Kansas. People came from miles around to honor the couple who had built something special, who had shown that love and hard work could triumph over any adversity. During the party, Caleb stood up to give a toast. "I want to thank my parents for everything they have given us, not just this ranch, though that is no small gift, but they have given us an example of what marriage should be, what partnership looks like, what it means to build a life together. My father once told me that he was the luckiest man alive. Well, Dad, I think we are all lucky to have you and Mom. Thank you for showing us the way." Coleman had to wipe his eyes, and Laurel was openly weeping. They stood together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and Coleman felt a profound sense of completion, of satisfaction. He had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life filled with love. 5 years later, on a cold December morning, Coleman woke before dawn with that familiar heaviness in his chest. This time it was worse, much worse, a crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. He knew immediately that this was different, that this was serious. "Laurel," he managed to say, and she woke instantly, taking one look at his face and understanding. "Christopher," she called, her voice sharp with fear. Their youngest son still lived in the main house with his wife and children. Within moments he was there, taking one look at his father and sending his oldest boy for Dr. Wilson. The doctor came quickly, but there was little he could do. "He is having a major cardiac incident," Dr. Wilson said quietly to Laurel and the children, who had all gathered. "I am sorry, but you should say your goodbyes." Laurel climbed into bed beside Coleman, holding his hand, pressing her face to his. "Do not leave me," she whispered. "Please, Coleman, do not leave me." "Do not have much choice," Coleman said with difficulty, but he managed a small smile. "Laurel, my love, my heart, my everything, thank you. Thank you for 35 years of happiness. Thank you for our children, our grandchildren, our life. I have no regrets except that I want more time with you." "We have had a good life," Laurel said through her tears. "The best life." "The best," Coleman agreed. His eyes moved to his children standing around the bed, all crying. "You make me so proud, all of you. Take care of each other. Take care of your mother. Keep the ranch going. Remember what matters." "We will, Dad," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "I promise." Coleman's breathing was becoming labored. He squeezed Laurel's hand with what strength he had left. "I will be waiting for you," he said. "When your time comes, I will be there, just like I was in the snow all those years ago. I will always be there for you." "I know," Laurel said. "I know, my love." Coleman's eyes closed. His breathing slowed, became shallow. And then, with one last exhale, he was gone. The silence in the room was profound. Laurel stayed beside him, holding his hand, memorizing his face one last time. Her children gathered around her, their arms around each other and their mother, united in grief. They buried Coleman on a rise overlooking the ranch, the same place where he and Laurel had sat so many times, watching the sun set over their land. The funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. The Reverend spoke of Coleman's integrity, his kindness, his love for his family and his community. Laurel stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said her own goodbye silently. This was not the end, she told herself. Coleman had promised he would be waiting, and she believed him. They would be together again. But oh, how she would miss him in the meantime. The days after the funeral were the hardest of Laurel's life, harder even than the days after she had fled Kansas City all those years ago. Then, she had been running toward something, toward hope, toward a new beginning. Now, She felt like she was simply existing, going through the motions without the man who had been her partner for more than 3 decades. But she had her children, and they rallied around her with fierce devotion. They made sure she was never alone, that she ate, that she rested. They brought the grandchildren to visit, and their laughter and energy reminded Laurel that life continued, that there was still joy to be found. Slowly, painfully, Laurel began to heal. Not to forget, she would never forget, but to accept. Coleman was gone, but what they had built together remained. The ranch prospered under Caleb and Catherine's management. The grandchildren grew and thrived. The James name was respected throughout Kansas and beyond. Laurel lived for another 8 years after Coleman's death. She remained active and involved, advising her children, doting on her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, writing her memoirs so that future generations would know the story of how their family began. She wrote about the night she rode through the blizzard, about the cowboy who had saved her, about the love that had grown between them against all odds. On a snowy December evening, almost exactly 53 years after she had first ridden into Salina, Laurel went to sleep in the bed she had shared with Coleman and did not wake up. She was 86 years old, and the doctor said her heart simply stopped. She died peacefully, a small smile on her lips, and her children liked to think she was dreaming of being reunited with the man she had loved. They buried her beside Coleman on the rise, and the entire town of Salina turned out for the funeral. The Reverend, the grandson of the man who had married Coleman and Laurel all those years ago, spoke of a love story for the ages, of 2 people who had found each other in a storm and built a legacy that would endure for generations. Caleb, now in his 60s, stood at his mother's grave with his siblings and their children and their children's children, and looked out over the ranch that his parents had built. The barn where his father had first taken his mother and her exhausted horse still stood, though it had been renovated and expanded. The house they had built with Laurel's inheritance was still the heart of the ranch, full of life and love. The land stretched out in all directions, productive and well-tended, supporting dozens of families. They did it, Caleb said quietly to Catherine and Christopher. They took nothing and made it something. They took broken pieces and made them whole. They showed us what is possible when 2 people truly love each other. They did, Catherine agreed, her eyes on the 2 graves, side by side. And we will make sure their story is never forgotten. Never, Christopher echoed. This ranch, this family, it is their legacy. We will honor it. The 3 siblings stood together as the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and red, the same sky their parents had watched together 1,000 times. Somewhere in the wind, they could almost hear their parents' voices, could almost feel their presence. The story of Coleman and Laurel James became legend in Salina and beyond. It was told to children and grandchildren, embellished perhaps in the telling but true in its essence. A woman fleeing a bad situation, riding through a blizzard on an exhausted horse. A cowboy who saw someone in need and did not hesitate to help. 2 broken people finding each other and building something beautiful together. The ranch prospered for generations, passed down through the James family, always managed with the integrity and care that Coleman and Laurel had instilled. The barn where it all began was eventually designated a historical landmark, preserved as a reminder of simpler times, of basic human decency, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances. And on winter nights when the snow fell thick and the wind howled across the Kansas plains, people in Salina would look out their windows and remember the story. They would think about the woman who rode into town on an exhausted horse and the cowboy who took them both to his barn and gave them rest. They would remember that sometimes, in the darkest moments, salvation appears. Sometimes, when you think you are at the end, you are really at the beginning. Sometimes, a storm brings not just destruction, but deliverance. And sometimes, when two souls meant to be together find each other, not even death can truly part them. Coleman and Laurel James proved that, living a love story that transcended the ordinary, that spoke to something eternal and true. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the family or the wealth they had built. Their legacy was the proof that love, real love, endures.